Now to our top story this morning, and the Prime Minister will call for robust pragmatism as he lays out his foreign policy agenda in a speech at the Lord Mayor's banquet in London later today.
Now, citing the threats of Russia and China, he'll say the UK needs to plan for the long term and also stress the importance of a strong domestic economy to tackle competitors abroad.
Well, it comes amid unprecedented wave of protests in China against the country's COVID policies. Demonstrators in Beijing last night called for the resignation of Premier Xi Jinping.
Well, let's talk to our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, who's here. It sounds extremely vague, Tom. Are we going to get more meat on the bones, do you think?
Well, it's interesting looking at the sort of history of Rishi Sunak. He's someone that's very focused on domestic policy. All of his briefs in government have been domestic focused. He hasn't really had a very big fleshed out foreign policy vision. In the leadership election over the summer, there were some sort of policies banning Confucius institutes, as they're known in the United Kingdom, some tough talk on China, but not really a very large and coherent philosophy when it comes to dealing with situations abroad. But, of course, in the last few weeks, he's been off in Bali meeting G20 leaders. He was in Ukraine last week meeting Volodymyr Zelensky. He's turned his focus more towards foreign policy a little bit more recently, perhaps because things are so difficult at home with many rebellions in the House of Commons. But robust pragmatism is the phrase, and it's an interesting one because to some people this looks like perhaps a watering down of some of the more fervent positions taken by his predecessors Liz Truss and Boris Johnson, particularly when it comes to countries like China. Pragmatism is a very interesting word because it recognises there, to some people, that there are economic relationships and then there are these sort of moral relationships, and perhaps it means a bit of a tightrope to walk there in terms of what's pragmatic with regard to the economy, but what's moral to do with regard to human rights.
And it is going to be that balance, isn't it? Because we're also expecting him to talk about the economy, and having a strong economy is key to dealing with foreign threats.
Certainly, looking at the way that, for example, we fund our armed forces, looking at the power that we can project around the world, ultimately there is that need to maintain a strong economy. And one of the issues, of course, is that if you were to restrict trade with countries around the world, I mean, we've heard a lot about Qatar recently. Qatar is a big exporter of natural gas to the United Kingdom. Just because they might sort of have a different morality when it comes to rights in their own country of many groups, does that mean that we shouldn't trade? And there are all of these different questions that need to be sort of answered and addressed in a more comprehensive framework than I think we've seen to date.
I mean, this is post-Brexit Britain then, isn't it? In a sense, having to address these issues as an independent nation. Much more, but as you say, keep the trade going.
Well, certainly. As a member of the European Union, of course, it was the EU that set the terms of trade for the UK around the world, set our tariff schedules with other countries and the like. As an independent country, the United Kingdom can, of course, set its own tariffs with other countries, strike its own trade deals independently. We've also seen the Magnitsky Act come in the last few years with individualised sanctions against individuals from other countries, which is a sort of more modern way to deal with human rights abuses and sanctioning from states rather than entire countries. You focus on those that run those countries. But yes, we are seeing now some challenges in terms of how you walk that line. Of course, global trade is slowing down. We've seen actually perhaps one of the reasons behind these Chinese protests we've seen over the last 24 hours isn't just the COVID policies and the awful case of that fire in the east of the country whereby people were sort of locked in and couldn't get out, but also because the Chinese economy has been slowing. And traditionally, when you've seen protest movements around the world going back centuries, it isn't just the nature of the thing that they're protesting. It's also often economic concerns that have to marry into that, acting as sort of two blades of a pair of scissors to create that pressure for those protests. So the economy clearly at the forefront of the Prime Minister's mind. And of course, that goes back to the two briefs that he had before becoming Prime Minister in the Cabinet. Of course, he was Chief Secretary to the Treasury and then Chancellor.